Well, here's a cliche. History is all around you. It must be true. Everybody says it. And it is true. We walk through historic landscapes, we go by historic buildings, we trot on the streets where famous people walked. We just don't know it most of the time. History's all around you, but it's a closed book for most people. My project, Spokane Historical, is an attempt to open that book. Spokane Historical is a smartphone app available both for iPhones and for Androids. It's also a website, and it's a place to explore local history. You open up Spokane Historical, and I'll show you the site in a moment. It shows you exactly where you are, and it shows you some of the historical events that happened around you. Spokane Historical is a product of Eastern Washington University. Go back here. It's a project of Eastern Washington University, which I think in this context we can agree is the premier educational institution in the inland Northwest. Sorry. It's something I do with my students. For years and years, I taught history the way it was taught to me. I had my students go to the library and regurgitate information they read into papers. I would make enough marks on the papers to justify the grades so they didn't come back and argue. I'd hand them back their papers. They would throw them in the trash on the way out the building. And it was a great waste of human life. So here's how we, going backwards. So here's how I do it now. My history classes are now community-oriented. We go into archives. Here's some of my students in the MAC. We go into local museums. We talk to community activists. We ask to see people's records. And we go off into the community and we research different topics and look for interesting stories around us. Sometimes the story is sparked by a building that someone sees. Sometimes it's something they read in the newspaper, something their parents told them. Sometimes they take an interest from some other class like civil rights or military history and look for elements of that in the Spokane region. And they learn traditional historical research, but very much with a foot in the community. They learn more than that, though. They also learn digital history skills. They learn to tell stories in a new format online. They learn brevity in their writing. They're used to their professors asking for 15 pages. I tell them, I want 5 paragraphs, but I want all the good information from your 15 pages still in there. It freaks them out, but they get the hang of it eventually. They learn about creating audio, creating video. They learn about copyright. They learn about finding images and converting them to new things. A lot of them come with these skills. A lot of them learn it along the way. Let me show you a few of my favorite Spokane historical stories. This is a fairly typical story. It's about the Washington Street Bridge. You've all driven across it. It's the one that goes underneath the hill in Riverfront Park. That is the third bridge there. This story is mostly about the second. My student who researched this, he found out the history. He told some stories that were, maybe not all that interesting at first. But then he struck gold. Let me show you what he did here.
In 1910, a group of Spokane businesses offered Harry Houdini an undisclosed cash sum to perform one of his daring magic tricks on the Washington Street Bridge. As seen here in this 1907 footage of the same trick performed in Rochester, New York, Houdini had chains placed around his legs and his hands put in handcuffs before plummeting to the waters below. Houdini reportedly sunk deep into the freezing waters for a moment before triumphantly arising to the surface unchained. Spokane businesses had an extra reason to celebrate, as the throngs of onlookers escaped the cold by ducking into the sponsoring downtown shops.
That's one example. That student, he discovered Houdini had done this famous trick in Spokane. He found an old silent movie of Houdini doing the same trick somewhere else. He wrote a narration. He learned how to do that. This is about the 10th version before he got it right. Learned how to layer music into that, put it all together. He graduated from Eastern and got a job at the Library of Congress. Here's another one taking a little bit different approach to putting together a historical video, and there's much more than video on this.
In this 1961 interview, Archie Camp describes his family's migration to the Palouse frontier and some of the struggles they experienced.
They landed in what was known as the desert of Whitman County, the marginal district. It wasn't a wheat country because it had never been broke out and seeded to wheat, but that was the only crop that they thought would grow there. My father hauled water for 8 years, shot rabbits for meat, and wore gunny sacks for overshoes. And the squirrels were there by the millions, and jackrabbits were so plentiful. And the squirrels were so anxious to eat something that had the sap in it and was tasty. So when they first raised their first wheat, the squirrels just would come in and eat it up. So the father got a strychnine and he plowed 4 furrows around the wheat, one next to the wheat and one out 20 feet and 20 feet and 20 feet, until the squirrels would die by the thousands. But you couldn't miss them because 20 squirrels come to each one's funeral. And
20 squirrels came to each one's funeral. There. So that's just an example of what are now the 400 stories we have on Spokane Historical. Students have quickly learned that if they come within 10 feet of me, they're going to get an assignment to write for Spokane Historical. But it works out well for them. Their names are on it. When somebody Googles them, this is what they find. The student who put together the Squirrel War video just got a full funded into a PhD program at the University of Montana. Spokane Historical is having an impact, very favorable compared to anything else really I've done in my career. We get 30 to 50,000 hits a month on the website. The smartphone app's been downloaded, I think 5,000 times last I saw. And we get a lot of information. It draws students into my program. It helps place students in good places when they're done. And it's really connected us to the community. Each semester I work with the students on a different sort of historical theme, something I think is missing from the Spokane Historical. One time it was history of the Spokane Valley. We worked with the Spokane Valley Museum. We form a different community partnership each time I teach the class. This fall we'll be working with Lake Roosevelt National Recreation Area and telling some of the history there around Fort Spokane and some of the other historic sites and putting it up. How do you get Spokane Historical? Well, it's free. You go to the iTunes store or the Google Play store and go ahead and load it on your phone. You can also access all of the material on the web if that's more amenable to you. It's a fun way to explore the town. Next time you're walking around, pull out Spokane Historical and see the history around you. Thank you.